Hey everybody, Scout Crafty here again. It's Friday. Thank God it's Friday. And yes, you made it through another weekend. You know, this video I was hoping to get done by Wednesday, and I couldn't do it. You know, sometimes you have too many things. Paint has to dry, glue has to dry, and you just can't make it in the 2 day. It's a tough turnaround, but we're gonna have it today. It's all done, and this project comes from a good friend of mine by the name of Brian O'Hare, and I've known this guy for 40 years. I mean, and one of my great friends. And the funny thing about Brian was Brian is one of those guys that can get anything for you if you need. You know, long before the internet. You know, if you collect something now, it's so easy to go on eBay and just say, okay, you know, I'm going to auction or bid on it or whatever, and you could find anything on eBay. But years ago, it wasn't like that. If you collected something unusual, you had to have kind of contacts or go looking around antique stores, things like that. It was very difficult to build up a collection, but Brian was one of those guys that can get you anything. I remember I needed I wanted an anvil, and you know, back then, this was pre-eBay. I said, yeah, I'm looking for an anvil. And Brian says, I'll get you an anvil. 2 days later, he had this on my porch. And, you know, so I always appreciate, you know, Brian has done a lot of favors for me. And he happened to come by a building that was being torn down, an antique building, a friend of his. And the friend said to him, said, Brian, if you want anything, you could take it. So Brian offered for me to come over, but I have too much stuff around. I said, Brian, I'm tripping over this stuff. I can't do it. So he went in and he picked out some good stuff, but he picked out a couple of items that he sent over, and that's what we're doing today. Let's check it out. And this is the project that we're going to be working on today. And Brian said to me, he says, you know, I pulled out 2 of these old doorbells. These were doorbells from the turn of the century, and how these work, they were manual, okay? And it's a regular bell, and it's got a little hole here that this piece of key stock would go in. It would go through the door, and on the other side of the door was this, like this, so here, this little handle. And when you came to somebody's house, you would give this a turn, and it would ring the bell and let them know you're there. Anyway, it's amazing how this lasted 100 years. It was still on the doors. He took them off, and he says, John, I'll tell you what. He goes, you clean them up, and then you can keep one, and you give me one, and we're good to go. So how can you beat that, right? So we're going to clean them up. We're going to mount them on some kind of board that, you know, like a display board, and that's today's project. So let's get now. What I like most about these type of old mechanisms is the genius and simplicity of design. Now here it is. The bell just is just a regular bell that screws onto this screw here. Okay, now again, there is the key stock that fits into this square hole here. And you can see what happens. It drives a gear that spins this at a good speed when you give it a turn. And then these little weights centrifugally spin out. And when they spin out, they make contact with this little notch here that's bent out of the bell. And that's what makes it ring. So it's very simple. There are 2 different makes, I guess, because this one here has a little bit different of a design for the bell, but works exactly the same way and uses the same type of key stock. But you can see the gearing works the same way. So we'll clean these up, we'll lubricate them, and remove the paint and get started on that. We are about 1 hour into the restoration, and that was just to get the paint off. There was about 4 coats of paint on this stuff, and it was just so thick. You ever know somebody like that when they paint everything in sight? You could see these were 2 different, probably years, maybe the same brand, probably different years, because this one here is a stamped steel plate, where this one here, I don't know, has some kind of brass coating on it. You know, we'll have to see now when we go to the wire brush. We're still trying to get some of that paint off. You see, when that paint it's very difficult when the paint gets into all these little crevices. I had to pick them out with an X-Acto. But look how nice this original paint is on here. So I'm going to try and keep that. That's original. That must be baked on enamel, because the paint remover didn't do nothing to that. And here we're going to have to obviously respray, and then the bells. Remember the bells? So let's get working on these. Here we we are at a post wire brush evaluation. Now this is where we determine what we're going to do, and you can see some of here, like this had some extensive pitting on. This will have to be painted, but this one here has a nice tone to it, like a tritone that, you know, maybe we'll clear coat over. And over here, this bell has some pitting that we won't be able to, I don't think we'll be able to go below that. So, but this bell here is fine, and we should be able to polish this up nicely. So we're going to mix and match and make Brian up the better one, and then we'll paint the rest. See what, well, that's, I'll have lunch and see what we're going to do. This is so satisfying. I love making circles with a compass, you know, especially a good quality compass, one that you know isn't going to fail you. And that's why you got to get a good quality, well-made compass that you can draw a good circle when you need. Now, sometimes you can't avoid a knot in the wood, but it helps if you can put the knot underneath another piece of wood that'll hide it. So that's what we're going to do here. We're going to cut around here, and hopefully the other board will cover most of that knot. That'll be from there. Now here's something I made about 30 years ago. I was given a router. See that router there? It's an old Craftsman router. And the base was stuck. In other words, it can't adjust. It's frozen. So what I did was I took the bottom plate off the base, and I mounted it onto this board. And I made it like a permanent router table. And I've used this for a ton of things. And it's a very simple construction, as you can see. But, boy, I'll tell you, this thing works great. And we're going to use it for making this. Now, we're going to use this to basically take this edge off here, the sharp edge off of this wood that we cut. And to do that, we'll just guide it across here. It has a little base here that'll stop, but I don't like to wear too much. I'd rather have a bearing one that is much better. But let's try it with this one. Okay, you can see with this nice little router table, you can see the nice job it did in taking off that sharp edge on here. Now we just do a little hand sanding, and that'll be good to go. Now I have the router table set up, and I could easily round over the edge on this using that, but I want to true it up, get it nice and true. And to do that, I'm mounting it in the lathe, and you can see here, we will straighten this out, and then we'll curve one end, and it should look nice. So let's try that. Now you know my favorite part. Remember what these bells look like before we started. And we're calling this project done. And you can see here what we did. We basically took the Victorian doorbells. These are known as mechanical doorbells. And they were ingenious because they didn't require any electricity or anything. And what I did was I took all the best components from the two bells because they look like they were the same company. And I made it into Brian. So Brian has the bell that has, this is a real nice finish on here. This is the original black that was on here. And he has a brass plate in the back. And then I put a little black in here. And you can see when you turn it here, that's how you would know when somebody was at the door. For the one that I'm going to keep, this one here had a little issues with the bell, you know, but I was able to, you know, grind out some of it. It's still presentable. The black here was pitted and rusted, but I, you know, black enameled it. And over here, put some black in here. And this one is a little bit worn. It works this way, but not so much to the right, you know, so it does. It's a little worn to the right, but still a nice example. But Brian's is pristine, works both ways like it should. And just a beautiful bell. And just think about these, how, you know, what a great design it was. Didn't need electricity, 100 years old, still works as well as it did then. And he could put this, if ever he gets a house that he wants to put it on an old door, he can always just unscrew it, put it on the old door, and it'll work like it did when it was new. I know what you're thinking. You're probably saying, how did that take you so long to do? It's just, you know, when you're doing small jobs, each one of those jobs required, you know, the glue drying and the stain and then the paint, and everything takes 6 to 8 hours to dry. You can't rush that stuff. If you do it, it doesn't look good at the end. And anyway, hope you enjoyed this project, and thanks very much for tuning in. Hope you have a nice weekend. Take care now. Bye-bye.